New York, and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
It's Ebro in the morning. Laura Styles is on.
She's on assignment.
On assignment. Mm-hmm. We got Rosenberg and the Bishop, T.D. Jakes. One of our members is not here today. She had something else she had scheduled, but we appreciate you coming by our program today.
I appreciate you having me.
First things first, I want to get to what you're doing with the T.D. Jakes Foundation and S.T.E.A.M. Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts. They've added. It used to be STEM. Now arts is in there, and math.
Exactly.
Which I love that they added arts because that takes kids down a path of learning the creative side of how to apply those disciplines?
That's precisely why we did it. The latest stats show that it is easier for underserved kids to connect with technology when you add arts to it. Whether it's production of music, production of film, it kind of gets you in the world of technology.
Video gaming.
Yeah, all of that. All of that gets you in the world of technology. But what we're trying to do is to convert them from being consumers to being builders, investors, and getting involved in the business side of it more than the buying side of it.
Now, our children, and when I, specifically low-income Black, brown children, these programs weren't always available in the public school system. Right. It was like, reserved for a private. Maybe the public charters had them, which is, the last 10, 15 years. But who is making a concerted effort to reach out to you and put this on your radar and you making this a part of your
Everybody
foundation?
is. The reality is our unemployment ratio is a little bit lower than 8% right now. Over the next 10 years, it's scheduled to go up to 20%.
Wait, but Trump's saying that it's the best time.
I'm not going there. The problem is, without racism, without biases, just technology alone is going to drive our unemployment rate up to 20%. If we don't get the word out that we need to embrace these programs and start at least learning how to code. You don't have to have a degree to learn how to code. So getting involved in it, there are 700,000 jobs available today.
That's
most of them six-figure. If we had people that were competent, we're the most underrepresented people in the force, and we have to make this change because it's happening.
So you're saying, Bishop, that even if racism wasn't a factor, simply
and
because,
it is,
and of course it is,
yes,
but simply because technology will take jobs, if you're unable to participate, the Black unemployment rate will just go up.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So that 20% could, in reality, be 30% when you add racism and biases and other factors in it. And the other area is not just Black and brown men, it's also women, too, that are underrepresented in the industry. It's so much so like that even when you hold your iPhone up for face identification, it's hard to identify your face because the people who did the programming didn't look like you.
That's right.
So even the mechanism is struggling to understand you because we are not represented in the process. These are great jobs. It's going to make a huge difference in the economy over the next 10 or 20 years. Thank God for all the people who are working on our history and standing up for our history and fighting for our rights to continue. I wanted to work for our future to continue.
That's right.
And so I wanted to get ahead of the curve and start getting the word out in our community and develop a foundation that helps to arm us with the tools to be successful.
Now, you say ahead of the curve, but I feel like this is it's not behind the curve either, but I feel like I've been talking about the jobs of tomorrow on our show.
Good.
For 5 years, screaming at the top of my lungs.
Good for you.
Our public school system is not preparing our kids for the jobs of tomorrow. I also work for a tech company, and I know in Silicon Valley, there are tons of jobs. Right. But they don't even have, America doesn't even have the workforce, so they bring people in on visas from other countries. This has been happening for a decade.
Good for you for using your platform. I'm using mine as well. It's not just Silicon Valley. It's in Chicago. It's in New York. It's all over the country in major cities. But it's not on our purview. It's not on our radar. And I believe this is the reason why it's hard to be what you don't see. And we don't have that modeled in front of us, so we don't think to go after it. But we do have the creativity to program, reprogram, build apps, get in the game, get started, get an entry-level position. My focus in New York right now is not just to announce the foundation, but to build relationships with corporations to open up doors for mentoring programs for minorities to begin to get our foot in the door so that we can make the changes the world
And I'm
needs
sure
to
they're
change.
excited to see you, too.
It's been real good.
From what I hear from from people who work at tech companies, oftentimes they're so disconnected from our communities, they don't even know where to begin. They feel like such outsiders. They don't want to approach it the wrong way. They don't want to speak to people who don't have a great reputation and get, led down the wrong path. And you have a great reputation, going to take them down the right path.
That's exactly why I'm sitting here. And I want the TDJX Foundation to be a bridge between people who have great programs and people who need great programs. It's hard to get the word out in our community. And most CEOs think that if they do an ad or they do an article in the Wall Street Journal, they are talking to our people, and they're absolutely not talking to us. Nothing against the Wall Street Journal. I read it, I love it, but the people who need a job generally do not. And so breaking it down into bite-sized pieces and not saying you've got to go back to school for 8 years, but you could take a course or you could go in the studio and begin to learn things from the studio that are transferable into technology has proven to be a very effective way to end up on Wall Street, end up at Goldman Sachs, end up doing something with Xerox or some Google or something like that. You got to start somewhere.
And how many people are you reaching generally these days? Because obviously that's one of the things that's so valuable is you do reach so many people.
I'm in 80 million homes every day through television. There's about 30 million people who connect with me on social media through YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, what have you. And then I've got 30,000 members in my church, and I stream online on average 20 to 50,000 people per Sunday. So I want to open up all of those ventricles as a way of saying, you don't have to live in my city. You don't have to share my political views. You don't even have to share my faith to hear this message. This is a message that has something to do with the sociological well-being of our community, and I'm willing to get out there and fight for it. The other part that the foundation is taking on is attainable houses, because most of the people in most of the cities around the country who protect our cities, who are police officers in our city, who are nurses in our city, who are janitors in our city, cannot afford to live in the city they serve. Yep. And so a certain amount of attainable housing for couples who make a living wage but cannot afford to make ends meet without living an hour and a half away, which means you spend your whole life going to work, at work, or going back home from work. So,
I read an article, a lot of people try to dance around the racial issues tied to homelessness too. 50%, a lot of people don't know this, 50% of homeless in America is black. Like it's a real problem. And a lot of that speaks to jobs of tomorrow. Right. And not only jobs, but well-paying jobs. Because when you hear, and I know you didn't want to go down the political Trump path, but when you hear, the current president get up and tell his lies and talk about how, black unemployment, are those well-paying jobs? Because you can be working poor in America. Right. You can have, as you just pointed out, you can have a job and still not be able to afford a roof over your head.
Yeah, or be on the verge of losing that job because it's going to be gone.
That's true more times than not in our communities. We have poverty has moved to the suburbs. It has a nice car, but it doesn't have gas in it. It's got a nice house, but we can't put furniture in it, and we are what we call house poor. We've got to do something about that because the suburbs are not designed to handle poverty. There are no programs. There are no subsidies. There are no things that you need. You can't even afford to go out and eat. You can't do anything. Then we got food deserts in there. So we got all kinds of problems. Right. So you know the problems as well as I do. I'm trying to work on some answers. Right. And the CEOs that I have been meeting with are really amenable to developing programs. You're right. They don't know how to get to us. They don't know how to talk to us when they get to us. There's some great programs out there that we never hear about. And my foundation is designed to bring that to the forefront so we can have this discussion. And I'm so glad to be on your show today because I think you have a congregation too. Yeah. And you have an opportunity, and the onus has to be on us to make sure that we become the media, particularly of the younger generation, who we sold them college and then they ended up with $150,000 worth of bills and no job. The young people who are going to school and getting degrees in things that aren't going to matter, and they don't know that it's not going to matter. The money, the skills, the jobs, the opportunities are moving to science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Computers can't do plays. Computers can't do music. Computers can't do a lot of things that we do. So arts is a really viable option, and it is a gateway because we love music, we love movies, and we love film. But let's stop worrying about watching them, and let's start making them.
I see your message a lot on social media. A lot of people love to share it. And most of the time when I see your message, it's it's very universal. It's inclusive. Like you have a very inclusive message, no matter, and I feel like no matter what your spiritual beliefs are, a lot of times when I'm hearing you speak, people feel like they can be a part of what you're saying. But as being somebody who is a religious leader and a spiritual advisor to a lot of people, is there today, it seems like a lot of people have negative assumptions about religious leaders and spiritual leaders in the mainstream. Do you see that energy?
I do see it a little bit, but not so much. I'm almost surprised the other way.
Got it.
When I go out in a room full of hip-hop people or artists or so forth and so on, I'm surprised at how many people actually do watch, are involved, that they use my voice on the opening of the NFL Super Bowl, that they use my voice for a basketball tournament. So there is a yes, and then there is a no. And then I want to inform you of something else. People didn't think highly of Dr. King during his lifetime.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that.
So if you're worried about being popular, don't get in the ministry. Don't get in anything that's public, okay? Because you're going to be controversial till you die. Right. And we have a tendency to only deify people after they're gone. And that's unfortunate, but to me it's irrelevant. I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to be effective.
Got it.
That's a really interesting way of putting it, because we've been talking about that, and I think actually, I feel like from where I'm from, I'm not surprised that black audiences would react better to hearing a religious message than white, because I know in my world there is a lot of, I'm Jewish, I'm relatively secular, and I'm close with a lot of relatively secular Jews, and I do feel like a lot of people's instant reaction is like, you being like, religion. Even when your name came up to be a potential interview, me and Laura's reaction at first was like, I don't know, because we're not deeply involved. And then I think when I hear you talk, you realize that sort of the perception we have of big churches and what religion is in America has been painted for some of us with a negative brush.
But it has been painted as such because it has been described by people who are not in them. And anytime you're standing outside of something and you take a photograph, you don't really get an accurate assessment of how things really work. If I give you an ultrasound and you understand what it takes to run, that I hired 300 people, that I've got more people employed than you do, that my overhead is higher than yours, that we have programs that are reaching all kinds of people, that we have had literally tens of thousands of formerly incarcerated inmates go through our program effectively and reduce the rate of recidivism, that's hard to say, and found jobs for them and found places for them to stay. You're not going to hear that in the barbershop. That's okay. My feeling
and
is
negative news travels farther. We know that.
And there's negative news in any profession, everything. But I think we as leaders have to stop being so sensitive and being more focused on what we have to do. And maybe it's my age or my stage. I want to leave something in the earth, a legacy that is not just words but action. I think we spend too much time worrying about haters and what people say about us. We're the only people in the world who focus on that kind of image rather than focus on getting things done. And I'm here to get something done. Nobody paid me to come up here. It costs me to come up here. I don't get paid anything out of the foundation. I don't make 1 cent out of the foundation. This is all going toward building better communities, creating relationships between CEOs and communities that are in crisis, getting our elected officials to help support this initiative, perhaps by getting incentive programs going. I'm not worried about what somebody said to me over the corner.
So where do you draw the line? You brought that up, making money from the foundation. I think the 80s, the image we have of the big super church leaders that were on TV a lot, Swaggart and all those guys when we were kids.
What was his name? Swaggart?
Yeah, what was
Jimmy Swaggart.
Jimmy Swaggart. And Baker, and there were a bunch of different ones that were famous that people would see on TV, created a certain image of it, right?
Can you imagine if hip-hop stopped because of scandals in hip-hop? Can you imagine if medicine stopped because of doctors who were sued? This is the only profession in the world that I have to answer for something that happened 20 years ago.
No, but I was going to ask
I am answering you.
Yeah.
I'm saying to you that we have good cops and bad cops. We have good preachers and bad preachers. We have good artists and bad artists. We have good people and bad people. That's the narrative, and that's the easy conversation talking point. I'm much more concerned about those single mothers who are trying to raise 2 kids by themselves, can't find their father by 2 different daddies, can't get a good job, making a decent wage to get an opportunity, than I am to responding to something that happened to somebody who's now 70.
At least that.
Well, I think also
Yeah.
too. I think the reason people galvanize around you is because you are one of the good ones who is focused, right?
I'm really trying to make a difference. I'm really trying to do something that matters. I'm really trying to do what everybody says is give back to the community, and have for years. Have had a long history of doing that.
And you started so young. So take us through that. You're in West Virginia. You're 23 years old.
Yeah, I started preaching when I was 19. I started pastoring when I was 22. I got married when I was 24. I was on national TV by the time I was 30. I have always been bivocational. I don't just minister. In the early years, I worked for Union Carbide and pastored a church. In the later years, I started T.D. Jakes Enterprises, is older than the Potter's House. So I didn't need the Potter's House to make my business. My business made it possible for me to do the Potter's House. So when people start seeing our films and they start seeing our plays, they start seeing our record labels, and now they start seeing our community development, they begin to understand this is not about an offering to buy a suit. The only persons who think that think very narrowly. And I'm not angry about people who think narrowly. They think narrowly because our community is not very literate about finances, about money, and about business. We don't know the difference between Jerry Jones and Deion Sanders. We don't have a marker between rich and wealthy. We just anything above us is rich.
Is rich, right.
Okay. $10,000 above me is rich. You got all kind of money. You ought to be able to do something in the community. Ought to be able to save the world.
Why don't you give it back? You got 10 grand.
You got 10% of a handful of people's money. The government has 33% of everybody's money. Why aren't we asking them those questions? Because they're taking the lion's share of our income.
Do you, in the congregation, and I've watched a lot of your work, you don't get into politics, as you shouldn't, right? But where you see our country at right now, right? How do you interpret that for your congregation? How do you because the other side of it is the fear, right? That's used against people, right? People are afraid of things they see the president saying on Twitter, the way he talks about people, the way he goes at people from different spiritual backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, the way, people are confused and afraid. How are you able to get people to really focus on what matters?
We're all fearful. I'm fearful too. I'm looking around in the restaurant. If somebody looks weird, I'm looking at them kind of funny. We're all nervous. You go in a theater and somebody moves around funny, you feel that pressure. So I start talking to them about the anxiety that we face every day. I am not into politics, but I am very much into policies. I think the policies are going to make the difference. I think sometimes we get caught up on the insults and overlook the policies. We need to be looking at the policies, both Democrat and Republican, because everybody who talks nice to you isn't for you either.
That's right.
So we have to go a little bit deeper, but because we have been so wounded, another wound won't do. I'm concerned because we don't have civil debate. We need debate. We need discourse. We need varying ideas, but we need to have it in such a way that we're not calling people names, making fun of people's incapacities, insulting them from racial or religious perspectives. But the debate part of it, we absolutely need. I'm concerned because we're lagging behind academically. I'm concerned because our economy fluctuates up and down. When we say the economy is doing good, we're talking about the stock market. We're not talking about Watts. We're not talking about certain other areas of repression. We need to do a different kind of stock market for that. We don't have the kinds of voices who are speaking for us, so we're dealing with the fear of being unheard. I think that's a problem in the Rust Belt states. I think that's a problem in the inner city. We're suffering from the same demographics, the opioid addiction, the drug addictions, the suicide rates are going up. All of these issues are going on while we're focused on what we're seeing on Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC, which is about politics. Nobody's covering the fact that the suicide rates amongst African-American children is escalating. While we're fighting for the rights of the unborn, the rights of the born are being ignored. We have to do some things that really get down to the crux of what's going on in this country, and we have to have smart people, not just charismatic people running for office, but now you have to be charismatic and you nearly have to be rich in order to win an election. Neither thing makes you a great leader. Some of the greatest CEOs I know have no personality at all. So it's hard to run a campaign when you have a blasé personality. We're starting to hire people like they're going to be in a movie or like they're going to be in a comedy show or like they're going to be in a reality show rather than that they are going to be the CEO for the United States of America.
You're talking our language up here. I mean, we've been that exact language we've used quite a bit.
I rail all the time. You know, I don't want a president that I want to have a beer with. I hate hearing that. I don't want to hear about his hot dog habits or where she shops or what she keeps in her purse. I don't care. I want to hear about how she manages individuals to come together for a common goal.
Exactly. And there's two things, since we're fussing about it, I might as well let it rip. There's two things. We are so focused on domestic issues that we don't examine them about international issues. We don't examine them about climate change. It doesn't matter the social issues if the whole world catches on fire. It doesn't matter about the social issues and the bedroom politics that we play around in if we look around and we have what happened in Flint happening again. Our infrastructure is aged and antiquated, filled with asbestos. I am burying more people with cancer than I have ever seen in my life, and nobody's saying why. I see more people dying of cancer than I do of AIDS by far, and nobody's saying a thing about it. What are we drinking? What are we eating? What's going on in our air that's causing young people who have never smoked to die of cancer? I'd say 7 out of 10 people that I bury die of cancer at all age groups. These kinds of issues we're not talking to our politicians and our leaders about. I'm seeing prescriptions that cost more than rent. I am seeing the decline of emotional health in our community in such a rampant proportion amongst young people, amongst children. Children suicide. Hello? When we start seeing things like that, people in high-profile positions committing suicide, money is not the answer. They had plenty of money. They still committed suicide. We are seeing stress all amongst us. You don't know who's sitting around this table who's dealing with stuff they can't talk about. And we don't go to therapy. We don't get help. We don't talk to anybody. And those of you who don't go to church, you don't even get any uplifting at all. So you internalize everything and start self-medicating your pain. All of us have pain. I have pain. I will not lie. I have my own pain. I have my own story. I have my own struggles. How you manage those pains and struggles determines to whether you get to gray hair or not.
Now, and also, too, a lot of times when you're up there talking, you talk about that mental health, right? And you get into that. And obviously people who frequent church, they get to meditate, they get to pray, they get to vet emotions, they get to feel, they get, as you pointed out, they get that upliftment on a weekly or even multiple times a week, right? They get in there and they get something. But you also talk about therapy. That is something in our families, specifically Black, and for the Latin folks out there, that was always kind of like, that's white people stuff.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Right. Or that's wealthy people stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? And a lot of people turn to their pastors.
Yes.
You know, for a meeting and as their confidant, et cetera, et cetera. Are you also still encouraging people to go get other help as well?
Absolutely, because there's a difference between a spiritual problem and a mental problem, and a chemical imbalance in your brain that causes you to be bipolar, paranoid schizophrenic, having extreme depression. It may be a medical thing. We have to understand that the brain is as much a part of the body as the heart is, and just because I'm a spiritual leader doesn't make me a physician. And so pastors need to know where to let up and refer somebody to other people. We need to lose our shame about going to somebody to get help.
That's a modern concept, though, right? The idea of being a pastor who would say that, who would say, you know,
it is a modern concept, and it is a modern concept based on the fact that we're seeing so many people who terminate their lives prematurely that just praying for you and telling you God's going to bless you may not be enough when you're having a breakdown. We don't want to see you coming back to church with a gun like we did a few weeks in Fort Worth and shooting up people in the church. We have to know your limitations in order to be effective. So those kinds of things are very important. Now, I'm going to tell you why we didn't need it as bad years ago. We didn't walk around with a pocket with millions of people contacting us from all over the world.
Get into it.
We didn't have those kinds of text relationships where we thought friends were friends because they followed us. We didn't have this facade of intimacy. We had real intimacy. We had Sunday dinners. We had Big Mama, who was the counselor. We didn't have a professional counselor, but you went to Grandma's house and Grandma said, "Child, y'all stop acting the fool. You know better than that, and you need to put your pants on back right and go." We lost all that. Now Grandma's got Alzheimer's. We don't have a dinner table. We don't have anybody to talk to. We often feel like we cannot afford therapy. And generally, if you have a problem, it is so personal, particularly with men, that you do not want to tell it. The silence is the enemy. Being able to discuss with somebody, not everybody. I'm not talking about putting it on Facebook and what the younger generation calls keeping it real. Keeping it real might not be keeping it wise. But you need to have some confidant where you feel safe, not exposed, to talk about what you're going through, what you are feeling, what happened to you, when did it happen, how does it affect you, why are you drinking so much, why are you shooting up all the time, why do you slap your wife around? We've got to get down. We publicize the what, nobody asks the why.
And men don't have those, I mean, unless you're in the church,
Right.
think about spaces.
Right.
Unless you can afford therapy, where do men, does the barbershop count? Some people have social groups that they could talk to, but generally speaking, is it encouraged for men, and specifically black men, to gather and really peel back and get to those levels of emotional maturity where you can articulate what you're feeling using words and not just violence and anger and lashing out?
I love this conversation. I looked around in my church, and my church was 50% men. I didn't go on a man campaign. I didn't go on a man hunt. They just started showing up. You know what? And then when they came, I began to realize it's not so much that we need a pastor, we need a father. We need somebody who's a little bit older than us, who's been down that road before, that knows what you are trying to say and can't get out. We need somebody that we can be a confidant to. You cannot work with ex-offenders and not be prepared to talk about everything, from rapes to abandonment to abuse to babies born in trash cans to early childhood trauma. We have ingested so much trauma as a race. There was a recent study done about survivors of the Holocaust, incidentally. The survivors of the Holocaust, the third generation of survivors of the Holocaust, when they did DNA analysis, they found out their DNA was rearranged by the trauma of their grandparents. That trauma is so long-lasting that it has an effect on the DNA
Imagine where
of
it's at for black folks.
You took it right out of my mouth. You took it right out of my mouth. We have been through all kinds of traumas. Our grandmothers raped and abused. Our fathers and grandfathers castrated. Emasculated. The fear when you see blue lights flashing in front of you. We have been traumatized by jobs we couldn't get. We're now traumatized by the fact that our women are exceeding and we are not. Who are we? Where are we? What matters? What makes me important is what makes me feel good about myself as a man. Finding those sorts of things and guiding us to the light is what ministries have to refocus on. I have not lost my message of Jesus Christ. I have not lost my message of Christianity. I do preach about blood atonement and second chances and deliverance, but you also have to have a practical, pragmatic gospel that is relevant to all people. You cannot just preach theology and not deal with the sociological constructs that are creating some of the depraved behavior that we see happening in our communities today.
That is Bishop T.D. Jakes, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and I just want before we let you get out of here, I want to ask you a couple of lighter things.
Okay.
President Obama, I know you led his prayer service before. What was your relationship like with the president? Can you tell us anything fun about your relationship with President Obama?
That I thought he was amazing as a person, that I thought he was humorous, that I thought that he had great swag and great intellect. I think that he had a strong passion to make a difference in the world. I don't think that he thought like a businessman. The business community doesn't embrace him because he's an intellectual. His style of leadership was a reflection of his intellectualism and his compassion for the underserved community. Unfortunately, when you take this position, you have to also be cognizant of CEOs and executives because they underwrite the budgets and the finances and control a lot of the power. A lot of the power we think is in the White House is not in the White House. It's in the boardroom.
It's in the policy, yep.
Yeah, and so rethinking that and understanding that he ran into all kinds of limitations on what he was able to do.
And we let him down, too. 2010, we didn't show up at the midterms and make sure that Senate and House was solid for him to move through that first term.
We did not do that. We did not do that. And I think that whoever ends up in the White House, we have to build a relationship, Democrat or Republican, whether we like them or not. They make the decisions that determine whether we wake up in the morning and the whole city has exploded. We cannot become so angry that we completely stop talking to the person in power, because once you do that, you no longer matter to them. Once they decide there's no way I can get you, they'll do nothing to get you.
Are you leaning in on Census 2020? Have people...
Yes, I'm leaning in really hard. I'm really leaning into it real hard. I've had some conversations with several leaders in the Congressional Black Caucus about doing a pitch at my leadership conference, which is going to be in Charlotte, April 28th through the 30th. We're going to deal with business. We're going to deal with census. We're going to deal with faith. My premise for the community is going to be exemplified at my leadership conference. I don't think that churches can do this by themselves. I don't think that CEOs can do it by themselves. I do not believe that elected officials can do it by themselves, nor community leaders. But if all four of those groups get together, we can lift the community higher because we have different levels of influence and strength.
Yeah.
How was, we mentioned President Obama, and you accompanied President Bush when Katrina happened. What can you tell us about George W. Bush?
He's a lot funnier than he comes across in public.
I think that's why him and Michelle are always giggling, right? Him and Michelle are always giggling.
He is hilarious in person. He's a very down-to-earth individual. You might not always agree with it. And this is something else we have to learn. You don't have to agree with everybody's policies to embrace who they are as a person. And that goes for Obama, that goes for Bush. I have worked with Democrats. I've worked with Republicans. I'll work with anybody that's trying to do what I'm trying to get done in the community. But George Bush did some amazing things and is an incredible individual. My heart went out to the Bush family and the loss of his father, because I saw the weeping of President Bush and recognized that he was not weeping as a president, he was weeping as a son. And so we cannot allow our celebrities, our leaders, our figures, we cannot allow that status to rob them of their humanity. Because when you deify somebody or demonize somebody, you take away something far more precious than you can ever get back, and that is their humanity. We are people just like you. We are flawed just like you. We are tired just like you. We make mistakes just like you. It's just that you get to see them and become the critics of those people, taking away their humanity. If we start respecting each other, even though we disagree with each other, just a modicum of respect, we would get far more done and have far less vitriol. One other thing, let me say one thing that I think is important for your audience to hear. People are making money off of us fighting. The way the media is set up today, it is driven by ratings. And in order to get great ratings, you've got to have great conflict. So you've got people who are fighting on camera and going out to have a drink when the cameras go off, and we go home and kill each other. We have got to stop drinking the Kool-Aid, think for ourselves. I'm not saying that all journalists are corrupt or wicked. I am saying that the people who hire the journalists are making the big bucks off of the fight because of the ratings.
And the advertisers are advertising right now.
Exactly. That's how the business works. And our people don't understand how the business works. And the African Americans watch twice as much television as their white counterparts because it's affordable entertainment. We represent 25% of the viewing audience, but we watch twice as much television, which is 50% of television, and we are only 13% of the population. While we are watching movies, we ought to be making movies. While we are listening at music, we ought to be making music. While we are running around decorating houses, we need to be owning them. We are not taught to own. We are taught to buy. It is the curse of slavery that we are better consumers than we are investors and creators.
And that's why he started the T.D. Jakes Foundation, focused on science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, getting people prepared for the jobs of tomorrow so we can get deeper into this economic situation in America and control a little bit more.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share it. Your audience, it probably needs to hear it far more than mine because they're young enough to do something about it. Yeah. The future's in front of them. They're birthing my grandchildren. I want them to be able to send them to the best and the brightest of schools. And you don't necessarily have to be talented in the ways that we tend to go for talent, whether it is to acting, to preaching, to hip-hop, things like that. You can be talented in science and technology and engineering and math and make a whole lot of money and be effective. This is not about looking successful and blinging and impressing people and not having life insurance and health insurance and things that you need to be a viable product in this society. Let's not look like it. Let's be it.
TD Jakes, give it up, Bishop TD Jake.